What we'll do is this. I'll pick a team now, and in order to just get through all the big teams, I'm just going to say the boring one, which is let's talk about G2. So G2's roster, and as far as I know, of all the rosters we've talked about so far, like I've heard the Fnatic one's basically locked. I've heard this basically is the G2 one as well, I'll just say based on the behind the scenes. So the G2 one is... They brought in Broken Blade as their top laner. Obviously, we just discussed. They send Wunder over to Fnatic. Oh, what's that? A player from G2 goes to Fnatic, but that would never happen. Carlos's entire life is just about not... Exactly. Shut the fuck up, you actual cretins. Like, at this point in time, if you're a Fnatic fan, all you should worry about is just having your hand looking for the next fucking branch while you swing, mate. Don't worry about League of Legends or business or anything. You know nothing about this space. Half a year still out there posting about how Fnatic allowed Caps to be transferred to G2. The amount of times I've fucking read that and felt my own IQ just dropping as I'm reading it is unbelievable. Like, none of that, like, literally none of those details are factually correct, except that his name is Caps. That's about the only detail you got correct. So let's get into this one. They've got Broken Blade coming. They retain Jankos and Caps, or as I call them, the fuck reckless club, because basically that's what they are. I didn't do that, guys. It just happens to be delicious and have fallen right in my motherfucking lap. So I just take the free W's when they come. So the fuck reckless club of Jankos and Caps, by the way, two of the greatest winners and players of all time. Oh, it's too rich. Anyway, that Reckless, sorry, my apologies. Reckless isn't even in LEC anymore. We won't be discussing him further. So then, obviously, for the bot lane, this is probably the spiciest part, because I'll tell you right now, the players they've brought in, I have barely seen myself, and I even watch the RLs sometimes, especially the big teams in the EU Masters. They brought in a bot lane of Flakked and Targamas, and obviously, this is potentially, I think, where we should probably start this discussion, right? Because this is, and by the way, as coach, Dylan Falco, obviously Broken Blade's previous coach from Schalke, comes in as the coach, right? Let's just start with the bot lane angle, right? Because this is obviously the spicy one, because I've noticed there's a bunch of angles for this. One, fans, another thing that like the Fnatic / G2 haters were doing is they say like, but G2 doesn't spend money on players, Thorin. What they do is they sign people for free. By the way, spoiler, everyone's allowed to do that. Your org is just much worse at it. Secondly, it's true, they haven't made any massive buyouts, that's true. But I'll say this, maybe shut the fuck up if you don't know the behind the scenes. G2 definitely play at very high salaries for their top players. They're not like these players because they come for free, stay for free, you moron. That's like saying if I gave you a fucking Ferrari Testarossa, would you like it for free? Spoiler, if you say yes, you are aware you'll never be able to drive it. The insurance alone will just put you out your fucking house, mate. Think how expensive that would be. You haven't thought it through. You would never be able to even drive it, would you moron? So basically, let's start on the whole bot lane topic. Who wants to jump in on this one? Because I have to say myself, I've only seen, like, there's only one of these players I can even vaguely vouch for. And I was a bit shocked by this myself. I heard basically behind the scenes, they really were, no joke, going for some of the biggest names in the entire world of League. I can't say more than that, I'm afraid. All I'll say is think of the biggest names ever for bot lane right now. They went for some of those people, but supposedly they chose these. This is the bot lane they wanted out of all of them. And the vibe I'm getting is it's one of those ones I'm like, I've been in the tryout, they're amazing or some shit. So who wants to jump in on this one, this grenade?
So what I would first say is like the point, the one of the first points you made in that sort of little segue was that, you know, if you look at the EU talent pool of ADCs, it's a little bit whack. I would say yes and no. It's the players that have ended up in the league might be a little bit whack.
Right.
Some of the options that they have, like again, like I made a tweet. Obviously, it was a bit tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I kind of stand by it. Of 20 AD carries in Europe, I would personally take ahead of Flakked. And if you don't agree with all of those names, you probably agree with at least half of them.
By the way, Rich, you are aware you're just wasting your fucking talents on tweets here, mate. That shit. If you worked for like the Score Esports, that's the video title. 20 AD carry talents that are better than Flakked. By the way, that's like 200,000 views right there. That's an instant click. But keep going. Give me the premise, because as you alluded to, it was a little bit tongue in cheek, right? There's not necessarily really 20 that are actually better, right?
I mean, I would say all of them were at least arguable. Like legitimately, all of them were at least arguable, but. And obviously, you know, Mad Lions also went down a route which a lot of people potentially didn't expect with Unforgiven. Unforgiven, funnily enough, was on my list of players I would have taken ahead of Flakked, so that kind of gives you some perspective on that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, we just assume that I have absolutely no doubt that Flakked probably performed well in the trials. It seems impossible, inconceivable that he wouldn't, or he wouldn't have even been given the job. And then, I said as well, like, oh, maybe they didn't play against, maybe they're playing against off-season opposition or whatever. And they're like, they actually played against the world champions, blah, 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 blah. It's like, do you really think, like, regardless of if they're scrimming for the purpose of winning worlds, do you understand the dynamic and the culture between Western teams scrimming Eastern teams, especially Eastern teams scrimming a fucking Western team who are like trying out a new bot lane who didn't even make worlds, right? Like, if you actually believe that Flakked, who is probably, and rightly so, should have been sweating for his life, this is his chance of a lifetime, to become the bot laner for G2. If you actually think that that's like a fair or at least conclusive representation of how good a player he is, because he scrimmed and presumably did pretty well against, I don't remember if it was Dam1 or EDG, whoever it was.
Some top team, yeah.
It doesn't mean shit. Like, you can pull as much from it as you want, but in reality, it means nothing conclusive whatsoever. One is literally playing his actual world final, right? In essence. And the other team are scrimming against a team they probably don't respect that much and trying out a bunch of things that may or may not be useful come their world final, right? So, yeah, but we have to assume that, regardless of the context you build around it, he must have played or, performed pretty well. I just think, considering some of the names, I mean, just again, looking at the players that were available, obviously some ended up on the LEC team, some didn't. Jack Spectre was obviously incredibly hyped. Not someone who I saw like loads of his games, to be honest. So that is someone that I'm going more off the opinions of,
By the way,
some of the other.
Obviously, we have got so few people in Europe that are good at banter memes. His fucking response to be replaced by Reckless actually was a straight 10 out of 10. Did you see it? Where he posted a picture where he just did a cosplay of Reckless, so he had like dyed blonde hair. He actually did do in Sharpie that shit Reckless tattoo on his arm. And then his joke was he just messaged like his owner of like Carmine Corp or whatever, like, can I please renegotiate? It was actually pure fire. Like, anyone out there, I'll see if I remember, I'll put it in the description box. It's actually low key one of the best, like, out of nowhere meme / response I've seen in ages. It was very good. It was legit.
But yeah, of the free agents that were available, I'll skip the ones that were kind of borderline. But based off the interactions I've had in the games that I've watched, Jack Spectre, Lucka, Comp, Bean, Zamalek, Xmati, obviously Hansama, but at the time of this tweet, obviously it was a bit more available than it seemed. Neon, Exakick, now we're getting into the slightly dubious ones. Kadui, Attila, Unforgiven. But there are, I've chucked in Double Lift on the list for fun. But there's, I think it was still like a pretty weird choice. Like, I think if you were going down the rookie angle, obviously there's this dynamic between G2 and Fnatic. So maybe Fnatic wouldn't have want to let Bean go because Bean's like the really obvious rookie, I think, of those guys. But, again, someone like Comp was available. I think this is a really weird decision. And as I said, it can only really have been based on the trial. And if I'm being really cynical, I think the fact that he's Spanish may have played like some kind of role. That aside, I can't really speak much towards. Targamas is an interesting one because, again, people who are kind of new to the scene probably think Targamas is a rookie when he's actually not. He played on Giants way back, I think 2015, either 2015 or 2016 he was playing on Giants, and he was actually really good. Giants was a terrible team, and he was the best player on that team by a mile. And it was very disappointing to me that this guy did not immediately get, recycled and put back into the LEC on another team after I think he got relegated with Giants, if I'm not wrong. I think Targamas has basically always been a good player. He did have school at during certain periods of time since he's been in LEC. So that explains maybe why he wasn't able to like fully commit to certain projects or whatever. And it's only been recently that he's been able to fully platform himself again. But I think Targamas is a good player. Flakked, I think, is, to be honest, from the games I've seen, a bang average ER. If we take like that pool of like 20, 30 players, I'd chuck him like bang in the middle of that in terms of ability wise, based on what I've seen. So I do think it's a weird one. I can't really fully explain it. I'm curious what Amazing thinks if he's seen him play more than I have. But based on the game, to be honest, I saw most of LVP. I've seen most of this guy's games this year. I just did not think he was that good.
I mean, to be fair, I've not seen any of his games. I can speak more about Targamas, but it's the decision making behind that worries me. while he may be good, let's just say he had amazing tryouts, right? Let's say he was like clearly the best player. Honestly, at that point, the best AD carry in the world that showcased that he would potentially have the potential to be the best player or best AD carry, like whatever. So one of the best AD carries for the future too. Like you base this off of tryouts, so that's already a mistake, as you put it already. Like it's like when teams practice at Worlds, they usually don't care about like gameplay that much anymore. When they are at Worlds, they care about getting the routines going, warming up a little, whatever it is, just making sure their communication patterns are in place, and that they suddenly like try out a couple of things within the meta that they may think that the enemy plays, and that's about it. So they don't really push themselves to the max in practice anymore, because that's what the official games are for. You really just want to just put the last couple of band-aids on whatever it is, and that's that. So I wouldn't take tryouts at Worlds or against Worlds teams as an indication for how good a player is. That's number one. Number two, it feels to me like kind of waving the white flag, to me at least, because when I think about G2 and I think about the players they've been hiring historically, even though in the beginning, obviously when they came about in 2016, they had a really rookie roster, and then they utilized that. The only one that wasn't a rookie was Trick, if I remember correctly, and Emperor neither. They were kind of like just imports that have played for these mid. Kickers was around the scene, but he was not really LCS material for quite a long time, or he played outside
and he swapped to top anyway, so
yeah,
there's that as well.
So many things happening at the same time. So like the beginning of G2's history is way different to how they evolved over time. So at this point, they're a team that signs good players and utilizes them to win championships and get and make it far at Worlds. So that, in essence, is kind of like a betrayal to the concept that they've had in the past. And it worries me because it seems intuitively, I would say, like this seems like a money-saving move to a certain extent. That's my intuition. I obviously don't think that Carlos would just not pay players or not pay certain people like that he regards as talents a really high amount. So if there were other players, he would have probably paid them. But that's my gut feeling. But when I look at it, it's also it's a delusional stance to think that this player can live up to the expectations you have set on him based upon who you think should join G2. And I think that's my biggest pet peeve that I have with this move. Hjarn and Wadid, they went there, they got kicked off EIU after, basically because they didn't want to keep them anymore, and they weren't championship material. That's why they exchanged them without players. And that's the same thing that they did with Emperor and Hybrid, right? They exchanged them too because they didn't think they were championship players. I think this move will actually come again, quite frankly, at some point during the season for Flakked. And I'm not trying to be a doomsday advocate here, but quite frankly, I don't think he's the fact that I haven't heard anything about him until he had the G2 signing is worrying to me. I heard more about Jack Spectre. I heard more about Exakick. I heard more about all the players that are also in the LEC lineups, besides Unforgiven, quite frankly, that I have about him. And that worries me because while I'm not the most LVP-heavy person right now, at least I think I have my finger on the nick of time to a certain extent. I at least understand how the scene functions, but this guy was never mentioned, and now suddenly he's on G2. So that is worrying to me.
I will say that is a real thing as well if you're in the scene. Here's the thing. The problem is if you're on the outside, right, it goes like this. If anyone ever ends up being good, every fucker comes out of every nook and cranny in the whole scene and goes, I knew him in 2017 when he was on. And I always said he'd be good. There'll never be a tweet or a fucking article where they'll be able to prove it, by the way. But everyone after the fact does it. It's the other way around that you can usually tell if people are legit. Like Amazing saying, if people really are smurfing in ERLs or scrims or they're in an academy league or something, you just hear about it. People behind the scenes are you actually will be in a team next year, or sometimes people even say, sometimes they'll even be bold and be he'll be a top 3 support player. So, that really does happen. It's why, for example, on the LCS episode, I was saying to Rich here, that's why I found this JoJo signing for mid lane of EG really bizarre. Because again, I've never heard this hype that he's some super secret, sleeper OP, which that does get out there. It's very rare someone comes through the cracks out of nowhere completely. What were you going to say, Rich?
Yeah, so I was going to make a more holistic point as well to what Amazing said, which is more and more teams on the LEC level. In fact, almost, it's very rare now, actually, that teams do tryouts at all because they've been so baited by this in the past. You'll still see it all the time on the ERL level, especially the lower ERL level, because then you're dealing with players who you literally know nothing about. And you're like, oh, this guy's 1K LP, but I've never seen him play. So yeah, try him out or whatever. But teams have been so betrayed by tryouts and also in-houses. Players, more and more over the last however many years have been doing these sort of in-house sessions and letting everyone and their granddad know about them, that teams are really moving away from this model as a means of like gauging players. Just to give you two examples, I hope they won't mind me getting their names, but once upon a time, Kadril's mid lane stock, and I mean, I guess I can say that I was, in a certain respect baited a bit by this, and also Pride Stalker as a jungler. I remember there was one season these two were popping off on everyone. Name your favorite best player in the LEC at the time. These guys were better. Like every game, super consistent. This is when Kadril was playing mid lane, by the way, just diffing everyone, just the best mid laner basically in terms of performance in these in-houses. Same for Pride Stalker in jungle. Everyone, in fact, there was like a fire sale to get both. More so, I would say, for Pride Stalker than Kadril, but there were multiple teams.
Well, you mean like a bidding war? Fire sales when you sell it off for cheap. You mean there was a bidding war, like people going crazy trying to get them? Yeah.
Oh, fire sale. So and obviously I think he ended up on Schalke, but it was this Schalke team that like all signed together the first day of the off season. It was like, again, this kind of, for the people in the know, maybe not for the fans, it was like a sort of super team, because if you knew anything about the in-houses that had been going on, these were the guys to sign, right? And I think Nuke Duck was a mid laner as well, which is obviously pretty funny because Nuke Duck is famous for being like insane in scrims / in-houses as well. So yeah, I think teams have been burned too many times in the past by this kind of thing, and that's why.
Spoiler, the reason the Pride Stalker guy wasn't that insane is because the other guy in the third box got to actually play fucking League of Legends again. So that's how you know he wasn't that insane, actually. Spoiler, that is actually the way it went.
So, I was actually surprised when I heard that G2 were doing tryouts for the AD carry position, because it's not really something that's done anymore. And what it tells me is, to Amazing's point, is I completely agree that it was a money-saving thing, or at least that was to a certain extent something to do with it. Because if you make the decision itself to do tryouts, that's what you're telling me. It's not about picking Flakked. It's about making the decision to actually do tryouts. Like, you're not going to tell Hans Sammer to come for a tryout. You're not going to tell Kazi or whoever. It's because you've already made the decision. You're going for a certain caliber of player, or at least a certain level of experience. So, I agree completely.
They must have some kind of backup on the ADK role in mind. Like, at least then this movement would make sense. I mean, the double left angle, as you put it, like actually, for funsies, but quite frankly, this guy would have. If I think about the AD carries right now, like quite frankly, he would have been my obvious choice besides obviously Hans Sammer. Like if you think about the quality of play you want with the championship pedigree that he has, so it's just
branding as well would have been through the roof.
That would have been insane. Like actually, we should just renegotiate before them and we just make that happen. But it makes more sense. It makes more sense. G2 Flakked sounds wrong, and I must believe that they have a backup option that they can kind of trust a bit more. Maybe there's one AD carry that I'm not thinking about right now that didn't get a team in the LEC that could potentially join them like at some point during the year. But it seems relatively bleak for G2 in general. I like the lineup besides that, but Flakked seems like such an odd one out. It's just...
By the way, here's the angle people haven't thought of whatsoever, because they just need me to be the little prick that just reminds everyone. This is how much Caps and Jankos don't like fucking Reckless. That, like, before they even began the process of getting a replacement, they essentially just said, under no context, do we want to play with this guy? Because that's the problem I have with this, right? Is, listen, essentially what that implies is they just don't like something about Reckless's mentality, or the way he comes, or the way he fits with their team. That's basically what I heard. Like, he's a little bit of a diva, and they just didn't think he was like a winner or whatever, It wasn't that he was like a bad player, but I think it's mad that, like, listen, the vibe I get is supposedly, I could totally believe what you're saying, like maybe it is to save money, but I also got the vibe that, they've been baited by tryouts, and that they were like, no, here's the thing, we could sign the best player, but this is actually like think of literally the best AD carry in the world. They could have had this player, basically. Now, I would say that's fucking whack. Just get that player and make it work and win worlds or something. But their logic would be like, no, but you don't get it. Like, we're going to tank like the PR angle, but look, we're going to look like geniuses if this works out. And maybe there's even an element, maybe Dylan Falco was involved, I don't know, maybe his eye test tells me these are good players, I trust that, to be fair, I think he's gotten the most out of every lineup he's had so far, so I'll give him a little bit of leeway there. But I find it kind of bullshit again, because with like what Amazing was saying, if you think of G2, every season I'm supposed to believe that they believe this could be the team that wins Worlds. I'm supposed to believe that's possible. Do they really believe a totally new bot lane? By the way, not even a bot lane that played together. That would be another great angle. If you said, but this actually thought this was like the like sleeper best bot lane in the RL, then that would be an angle. You know, that'd be a reason to bring both of them. I don't get why they both get put together, because again, I'll kind of echo what you guys said. I've heard enough about Targamas. I actually had heard some fucking hype that this guy might be really good. Maybe that one I can buy into. But by the way, is Reckless that bad that you can't just have the Targamas guy and Reckless? Like, is Reckless not better than these? But surely he is. Surely he, like, this is going to have to be, by the way, one of the greatest gamble / eye test reads of all time by either Carlos or Dylan Falco. Otherwise, you're going to look a bit silly that A, isn't Reckless, and B, isn't even anyone who, like, here's the problem. We don't have a reason to believe in this person. So we're not even with you at the moment, G2. We're not like, right, it could be amazing. At the moment, we're like, I've seen nothing. You better be sure. I'm starting at level 0, and you've got to just show me something. So, and then the other thing is, the rest of the lineup's good. Like, I have no problem with the lineup. There's also a world where, like, if 4 players are good, that could be enough to win LEC. It's just, again, is this really the team that's going to go deep at Worlds if we spin? Like, if it isn't, by the way, get this port here. This is in the meme compilation. Fast forward, and then you go to Worlds and you show them all fucking carrying every team fight. I just don't buy it, personally.
Will they even go to Worlds? It's also a question.
No. I was about to say, this team, in my opinion, this team doesn't make Worlds, or at least they're not one of my top 3 favored teams, because I think the other aspect with this team isn't just the big question marks over, bot lane and whatever. It's also Jankos and Caps. I think there are question marks over both of them. And that's not me saying that, they haven't earned the right for me to give them the benefit of the doubt. I do give them the benefit of the doubt in that I'm not massively doubting them, but I can't be sure of, or 100% sure about what I'm going to get. Caps was not Caps last season. He was still good. He was still one of the best mids. He was not the best mid. And if we go beyond last season, he was by far the best mid in the West, right? Yeah. And he's just not that guy at the moment, or at least when last seen in action. So will Caps be Caps again, or will Caps just be this pretty good 8 out of 10 mid laner that he was last split? And Jankos, again, when you had in 2019, Wonder being the absolute epitome of consistency and high-level play in the top lane, when you had Caps absolutely popping off, and, when obviously Perks and in the bot lane with Mickey, Jankos went through patches of being the best jungler for sure, but also not actually playing that well whatsoever. And he's kind of had that in him the last couple of years overall, regardless of how good the other players were or weren't, or the phases that they were going through. I'll still watch Jankos in a BO1 and be like, yeah, Jankos is still the best when he can be bothered. And then watch him next week and be like, wow, this guy got diffed by the worst jungler in the league. So I actually think those two are also a question mark. How are you getting peak Jankos and peak Caps? Because if so, then cool. Hopefully, if he doesn't pop off, early season, you can just boot out Flakked and get a decent AD carry and then send a really good team to Worlds. But if they are not both playing at a really high level, then this team has no chance of going to Worlds, in my opinion.
I'll give you an angle on that quickly, because while I totally agree, by the way, I actually thought last year was the year where you see how deeply ingrained in players and analysts' minds, like prime Caps is. I didn't even get the vibe from people on stream who were saying Caps was the best miller, that they really totally believed it. I got the vibe that the logic was like, because I just need to believe this guy is always going to be the best. As long as he's not like bad, I'll just say he's still the best, or, he's still among the best. You just start putting all these caveats in. But the difference is, as you say before, Rich, the joke was, the reason why on paper it was an easy choice between Perks and Caps for Carlos is because he thought he was picking the guy who really just gaps his whole region. The idea is like, look, if I pick this guy, it's a slam dunk that he's at least going to be the absolute best mid lane, if not the best player in the whole fucking league. Like, the premise was, it was only the intangibles you were even thinking about with Perks. I don't think actually last year played out in that sense what they thought at all. But I'll add this one angle. I will say this. If I needed someone to come in, Rich, to be the Caps whisperer, why not the guy who basically fucking birthed Caps in the LEC? No, not Nico the Pico. He's actually dead and long gone, and sadly no one remembers he even was the one who brought him in. I'm just going to pretend it was Dylan Falco for the purposes of this analogy, because he did work with him for over a year. He was where when he became a great player, etc. So I think that's an interesting reconnection between the two.
I think the biggest telling, or the most telling thing for me, actually, with all that we've said on Caps aside, is that anecdotally, And I guess a part of this is because it was like kind of newer and fresher at the time. But mid laners used to speak to me all the time about solo queue and how different it was when you had to play against Caps in solo queue.
Right.
And they'd even say something like, man, I had like a really rough day. I lost like 7 out of 8 today, but whatever. I played against Caps 3 times. So they'd like legit say stuff like that as if it was like unwinnable, you know, like this guy's just on different level. No one says that anymore. Like no one says like, oh, I played against Caps in solo queue and I just couldn't breathe in. Like no one says that. So I think there is like, and I don't think solo queue's a good barometer of that many things, but it is a good barometer of some things. And I think the mechanical pressure someone can put you under on a regular basis is something that solo queue can speak to with a player, especially that plays the same position. So I do think that is a little bit worrying. I'm far from saying Caps is washed or anything like that, but he does seem to have dropped into the pack a bit, even though he's near the top of it.
No, it's a good angle to talk about solo queue actually in terms of that regard, because you usually have even back in the days, you had a preconceived notion of certain players based upon your solo queue experience, even if they were kind of weird in scrims, whatever. You just knew that if this guy really wanted to put their mind to it, they could destroy you or try to destroy you. So there was a level of threat that he had with some players, and Caps was definitely amongst them. He doesn't fill a role anymore. I think even like people talk about Nuke Duck, even solo queue, more than they talk about Caps these days. Like Caps is literally just playing solo queue and that's it. He's just playing, but he's not dominating anymore. But as I said, like I would say if Jankos and Caps play to the highest level, and Broken Blade is all that he has been last year, and he's going to be as good as this year, this lineup could and should go to Worlds, potentially even go to the finals in EU. But if they're not at their peak, that's where, like, I mean, it's like a free fall. They got on to 5th or 6th, in my opinion, if I think about it, because Fnatic is definitely, like, on paper better. Vitality is on paper better. Mad Lions are still the defending champions despite losing Karzi, like Humanoid. So maybe you can still see some adaptation there. Like, I'm not saying that they're going to be top 3, but they're still there. And then you have Groku's also there. So you at least have like 4 and maybe if Misfits 2, 5 teams who are going to compete like to a certain extent for those playoff spots. And then I think they're G2. So all of these teams can edge one another out to a certain extent in terms of playoff spots, besides Fnatic and Vitality are going to be top 2. But the rest is going to compete for 3 at least, you know? Especially Rogue is probably going to edge them out. So I'm very worried for G2, and I don't quite know where they're going to end up. Like it feels like a Hail Mary attempt to a certain extent to rekindle old peaks to a certain extent. That's it.
Yeah, the main thing I will just say is it's like I said, for me, I agree with Rich. Like the vibe of what, oh no, it's actually amazing with that point. The vibe of what G2 represents doesn't quite come through on this one. Like if you think of the team they made last year, that's exactly what you expect to be. They're supposed to be like the modern football example. They're supposed to be like a PSG type team where every year, no matter what, you add the next big superstar players. Here's the key thing I'll say, and I will actually minorly call out Carlos on this, is one thing I've always appreciated about Carlos actually is that he's like me. He believes if you really can do an upgrade, you do an upgrade. Well, this isn't a fucking upgrade, is it? Like, look, I know you might think it is, or it has the potential to be, but when you say when I say upgrade like that, I mean like a surefire thing. I mean like going from like having, like the example would be you take out one day. If you'd signed Alfari, that's just game over there, right, mate? Like, there's an obvious upgrade. Like, we don't even need to discuss it. We can discuss around it. Like, you know, will he fit the team? How will he shot call? But the idea is player for player performance wise, I can turn my brain off on that one. You nailed it. You're the bigger org. You got the bigger team. So to me, like I say, I think like they're not just gambling like the eye test. They're actually somewhat gambling the rep of the org, because if this turns out to be not just not good but like a bad pickup, like say both players just tank and they're not very good, and then the pressure on the others to carry is enormous, where the fuck's G2 going to be at the end of the year? Because even though I don't buy into all that nonsense I alluded to in the intro about like all the Fnatic fans and stuff, they have essentially poisoned the fucking well. Like G2 now has sort of like, I wouldn't say a bad rep, but they just have a rep around them where people are just wary and people are trying to imply they're screwing people over and all. I haven't seen anyone they've screwed over, by the way. Spoiler if you're a Fnatic fan. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.